Hi, my name's Leo and I'm a boat builder and a sailor, and I'm on a mission to rebuild and restore this 110-year-old classic sailing yacht, Tally-Ho. We've been working on casting the bronze floors, and now I'm just about to start getting into making the patterns for the hanging and lodging knees. But as we're getting into some more obscure boat terminology here, I thought it might be a good time to go back and look at how a wooden boat like this is built and the different names and terms we use for the different parts of it. Some of you will already know all of this, of course, and so if you want to skip ahead to see the progress we've made this week, you can go ahead and skip forward to this time in the video. Okay, so right now we're going to run through very quickly the main components of the hull of a wooden boat in terms of its construction. I'm not going to go into too much detail. This is just going to be a quick guide for people who aren't that familiar with wooden boats, basically to help them understand what's going on in this project. So very quickly and right from the beginning, the front part of the boat, the pointy bit, is called the bow, and the back part of the boat is called the stern. Directionally, anything near the front of the boat or in front of the boat is referred to as forward, and anything near the back of the boat or behind the boat is called aft or after. The left-hand side of the boat, if you're facing forward, is called port, and the right-hand side, if you're facing forward, is called starboard. The centre line of the boat is a vertical plane that runs down the centre from the very front to the very back in the middle of the boat. Anything that runs parallel to that line is said to be fore and aft. And anything that runs directly perpendicular to that line, so across the boat from one side to the other, is called athwartships. The word amidships refers to the middle of the boat, and that can be used both in terms of fore and aft position or port and starboard position. The beam of a boat at any particular point is the width from one side to the other, athwartships, and as a measurement it usually refers to the widest part, the beamiest part of the boat. Directionally speaking, you can say the port bow or the starboard bow, referring to positions diagonally to the port or starboard of the bow. And you can say the same thing in the stern of the boat, but you would say the port quarter or the starboard quarter. The draft of a boat is the depth from the surface of the water down to the lowest point of the boat while it's floating. So in terms of the actual parts of the boat, we're going to start with the backbone or the centre line. These are the large timbers which follow the centre line of the boat from the bow to the stern, to which everything else is attached. The different parts of the backbone actually have different names according to who you ask and where you are in the world, and in fact that's true for many parts of a boat. Most parts of a boat have at least two different names, and there are also some names which can refer to at least two different things. But I'm going to try and give you an idea of the most widely understood basic terminology. So from the bow, first of all you have the stem, that's the very front part of the boat which cuts through the water literally, and the actual shaped part of that is called the cutwater. Aft of the stem you usually have some kind of forefoot which continues the centre line down, and the stem and the forefoot are usually connected with some kind of stem knee. In other cases there's no forefoot, the stem goes directly to the keel, but in that case there would be some kind of stem knee or forward deadwoods. Deadwoods is one of those words that can refer to a few different things, but it's generally the blocking inside the boat to raise up the height of the centerline timbers and create a larger bracket basically that will hold the stem or the stern post down to the keel timber. So the keel timber really forms the bottom of the boat. It's connected to the stem at the bow and the stern post at the stern, and it's connected to the frames and the planking and the floors and the ballast. Underneath the keel timber you usually have a ballast keel, which is usually made of lead or cast iron and is bolted to the keel timber. At the stern you have a stern post, and between the stern post and the keel timber you have a stern knee or some after deadwoods, basically big chunks of wood that hold the stern post and the keel at the right angle to each other and make sure they're connected with a lot of strength. Also part of the centerline is the mast step, which is literally a block of wood that the mast will land on and notch into. In many boats the mast step actually sits on top of the floors. In Tally-Ho it actually sits underneath the floors and scarfs into the forefoot. Boats with different types of sterns have more parts of the backbone that extend aft of the stern post. The names of those pieces depend on the particular type of construction, so I'm not going to get into that right now. The frames of the boat are a bit like the rib cage. They go up from the keel and up to the top of the hull, and they support the planking, the hull planking, which fastens to the frames, runs fore and aft along the outside of the hull, and then notches into the centerline in what we call a rabbet. Now the rabbet on a boat is distinct and different from a rabbet or a rebate, which you might find in joinery. In joinery, the rabbet or the rebate is called something different depending on where you are in the world, but in boat building, the rabbet is always the rabbet. Now the floors of the boat, usually called floor timbers because they're often made of timber, are the brackets which fasten to the frames and to the keel timber. So they basically hold the frames down to the keel. You have the hull planks running outside of the frames, of course, and then inside of the frames, some boats have ceiling planks. Tally Ho does not, but she does have a bilge stringer, which is a heavy beam that runs fore and aft on the inside of the frames, just below the turn of the bilge. Bilge of the boat, incidentally, is the part inside of the boat at the bottom underneath the sole boards, which are what you stand on. The sole is actually what you would think should be called the floor, but no, you stand on the sole. Underneath the sole boards, you have the bilge, which is generally where muck accumulates. You have some ballast in there, some heavy weight, and seawater and all sorts of horrible, smelly, oily stuff. Now, holding up the deck, you have deck beams, and the deck beams are fastened to the rest of the hull through the beam shelf or the shear clamp or the shelf and clamp, depending on, again, where you are in the world. But basically you have one or two or more large timbers running near the top of the frames on the inside, which support the ends of the beams. That joint is strengthened by hanging knees and lodging knees. Hanging knees run from the bottom face of the beams and down onto the frames and give that joint stiffness in its athwartships direction. Lodging knees run from the side of the beams to the beam shelf, and they give that joint stiffness in its fore and aft direction. Both of these knees are usually made out of timber, and lodging knees are actually called lodging knees because they sort of lodge in between the deck beams normally, although in Tally Ho they don't, they're bronze and they actually go underneath the deck beams next to the one that they're attached to. At the stern of the boat there can be several different types of stern. Some of the most popular include a counter stern, which is an overhang after the stern post, sometimes very long and usually with a small transom at the end of it. A transom stern is what Tally Ho has, and that's basically just a big transom in plane with the back of the stern post, and in that case the rudder is usually hung aft of the transom outboard of the boat. And a counter stern, the rudder is still mounted onto the stern post, but it usually goes through the hull and comes out on deck while the counter stern extends behind it. Canoe stern is another popular stern where the planks actually come in to meet the stern post all the way up to the top of the stern post, so there's no transom at all. And there are many other designs as well. On top of the deck beams, the deck itself is traditionally constructed with deck planks. These can be straight or they can be swept with the curve of the deck. On the centerline of the boat, there's usually a wider plank or several, which is called the king plank. And at the outsides of the deck, there are also often wider boards, which are called covering boards, because they cover the joint between the deck beams and the frames. Through the cover boards, you often have bulwark stanchions or stanchions, which are upright posts which support the bulwark planks. The planks run fore and aft outside these posts and create a small railing, if you will, that stops things or people from falling off the boat and protects you a little more from the weather. Not all boats have bulwarks, but if they do, they are often capped with a cap rail, which is a piece of wood that goes all the way around the outside. It's called a taffrail right at the stern. On the deck you have various deck openings. There's a companionway hatch which opens to the companionway. The companionway is simply the entrance into the boat, the steps which go down to the inside of the boat from the deck. Many boats have a deck house. Tally Ho does not, but she does have a butterfly hatch or a skylight hatch and another companionway hatch right at the front of the boat. She also has a cockpit, which is a sort of rectangular seating area recessed down into the deck where you would sit to steer the boat. The steering on Tally Ho is done via a tiller, which is just a long pole attached to the top of the rudder, which you move as a lever to move the rudder and therefore steer the boat. The other common way of steering a boat, of course, is via a wheel. Okay, well, I think I'm going to stop there for now. It's a very basic overview and I'd love to go into more depth, and I will do at some point, but for now I think that what I've described should explain hopefully most of the parts of the boat that we've been working on so far and the parts that we're going to be working on in the near future. If you found this part of the video useful or interesting, let me know in the comments and I'll try and do more of these focusing on different areas of the construction of the boat. Alright, let's do some work. How's the grinding going?
It's going really good.
Yeah?
Yeah, we're kind of just prepping for polishing now. I'm Bonnie Adams, and my husband is Patrick. And we brought our oldest son up here because he has not seen the boat yet. And so he's helping his dad over at the foundry, and I'm here polishing floors.
Great. And you're no stranger to metalwork, are you?
No, I am a high school manufacturing teacher, and I teach metals and a little bit of welding and some 3D printing and stuff like that.
Well, thanks for your help.
You bet.
So as you can see, I've got all of the hanging knees and the lodging knees arranged inside the workshop, and I've laid them out as they were in the boat according to their position. And this is basically just so that I can be totally sure where they all go. They're all numbered, so I know which frames and beams they're on, but it makes it easier to double check the lengths and the shapes and the positions. I did really consider whether it might be possible to reuse the original hanging and lodging knees. They're made out of wrought iron, and because they weren't down in the bilge where water collects, they've survived much better than the floors, so there's quite a lot of material there. I'm sure they would be strong enough. However, there's a couple of serious issues. The first thing is that because they are iron, they're going to rust, and although that won't necessarily damage them to the point that they won't be strong enough, what it will do is damage any of the timber that they are in contact with. In fact, iron sickness from the hanging knees, the lodging knees and the floors are one of the main reasons that the frames of the original boat were so far gone by the time I got her that none of them could be saved. There's many ways that I could coat them to stop the iron being in contact with the wood, but I feel that none of these is going to last for 100 years. Any wooden boat builder will tell you that you want to avoid ferrous metal in any part of the construction of a hull, if at all possible. Although this project is an exercise in recognizing and appreciating history, more than that, it is the maintenance, if you like, and upgrade even of a beautiful and practical wooden boat that just so happens to be 110 years old and have a fantastic story behind it. So the arms of the hanging and the lodging knees are tapered in both directions in their thickness and slightly in their width. And this is important because as the bronze arms get thinner in the ends, it bends more easily. So with the tapered arms, the stiffness of the bronze is introduced gradually into the timber. And the first thing I wanted to do in making these patterns was to find a way of quickly and easily reproducing that taper in many different pieces. So what I've done is made a jig. This is a sled which will go through the planer or the thicknesser, depending on where you're from. And it's a sled that's got a taper on it. It's got a 5/8 taper over about 30 inches. Now a solid piece of timber can be put on this sled and run through the planer, and that's great if you're making a straight arm. But even more useful than that is to use it to taper plywood for the arms which are going to be curved and therefore going to be laminated into position. So all you do is cut a bunch of lengths of thin plywood, screw them down onto this board on top of each other, run them through the planer a few times, reducing the depth each time, and what you come out with is these top layers of plywood being tapered down to a feather edge. There's a nice taper on this stack as a whole, and then you can just take the bottom piece, put it on the top here, and this is a nice tapered arm ready to laminate into any shape you want, and this jig can do 4 or 5 sets of these stacks of plywood at a time. The thickness of these tapers from 1 1/8" at the thick end down to 1/2 inch at the thin end. After these have been made, they are glued into position in the boat, clamped up, left to dry, then they're taken off of the boat and they have their taper in the other dimension cut into them on the bandsaw and then cleaned up on the planer or the jointer. Then they get clamped back into their positions on the boat and glued together directly if they're a lodging knee, or if they're hanging knees then they'll have the small pieces which join them up glued into place between both of them to hold it all together in one unit. After the glue has gone off, then I put screws in to make sure that they're strong, and then I just use a polyester filler to make the fillets, the curves on the inside corners. Those curves are good for the strength of the knee, but also they actually help the casting process because the molten bronze doesn't like to go over a sharp corner. It actually creates turbulence and that can superheat the bronze. It'll make it too hot. Now I haven't got through many of these this week because I've just been developing the process and I've also had to spend way too much time in the office. But I've got a good process sorted now. I know how they're going to go, and we're hopefully going to get into mass production next week and get as many of these done as possible.
So step one on getting these floors all polished up pretty is to install it in the boat and kind of see where there's high spots on the back side where the mold has swollen, to kind of give us a starting spot of where to hit it with the grinder so that it fits flush with the keel timber and with the frames themselves. So we just stick a homemade feeler gauge behind it, see where it hits, mark it up with a Sharpie, and then we take it out of the boat, take it in the back and start hitting it with the grinder.
Well, let me tell you what I'm doing here, Leah. Hey, Pete. Hey, Leo. What you doing?
I'm waiting for it. I'm building a really elaborate birdhouse for Poncho. It's gonna be great. Mansion. I'm fairing frames in preparation for planking. So
I'm going around the whole boat with a batten and clamps like this. I see how the batten lays, so ideally batten lays flat across each face of the frames, which is important because that's how the planks are going to lay. And then after I clamp it on, I sight down the whole thing and make sure there aren't any big humps in it or big long flats, so to keep a fair curve. And obviously it changes all around the boat, down in the tuck and around the turn of the bilge.
just explain to people what that means.
Yeah. The turn of the bilge and the tuck. Well, they're the turn of the bilge and the tuck. That's all they are. The turn of the bilge is the side of the boat, kind of, where the side of the hull comes down and turns into the bottom. And then the tuck is the reverse curve that gives that boat the shapely bottom it has and tucks into the keel. And so it's that reverse wine glass shape. And so that's what those two things are. Right? Good?
Yeah. Sweet.
So it's been a good couple of weeks. Although there's not been a huge amount of visual progress, I am really pleased with how things are going. We're doing several fairly large jobs simultaneously right now, so it does take a while. But the castings are going well, the fairing is going well, and I think next week I should be able to get a lot of the hanging and lodging knee patterns made. Also next week we're going to meet our new apprentice, so that's going to be very exciting. For now though, thanks a lot for watching, and a massive thank you to everyone who's donated or otherwise supported the Tally-Ho project. It does make a huge difference, and it means I'm able to take the time to make and edit these videos, so I really, really appreciate it. I'll see you next time. Cheers.